the small mountain town where I grew up. During autumn, it turned into a living picture, with the leaves painting the scenery in shades of red, orange, and yellow. The mountains surrounding the town rose majestically, their slopes covered by a dense and mysterious forest. It was a beauty that attracted tourists from all over, eager to capture the essence of this natural spectacle. But while visitors marveled at the landscapes, the town's residents knew a darker and more terrifying side of this time of year. Every autumn, a sinister figure, known as the Raccoon Man, would appear. The myth of the Raccoon Man hung over the town like a shadow, a mystery that instilled both fear and curiosity. They said he was a strange figure, looking more like an old man with a dirty and ragged appearance. His clothes were old and tattered, and he exuded a putrid smell that announced his presence before he was even seen. Because of his disheveled look and the stench, the residents nicknamed him Raccoon Man, although some gave him equally unflattering names. The mystery around the Raccoon Man was fueled by old stories and rumors spread by word of mouth. No one knew for sure what he wanted or where he came from, but everyone knew his appearance was not a good sign. At the beginning of each autumn, the residents exchanged apprehensive glances and closed their doors and windows earlier. The tone of conversation changed, becoming hushed and nervous, as if they feared even talking about him might attract him. There was a mix of curiosity and fear in the air. Growing up in this town meant being surrounded by stories and mysteries. I remember afternoons spent playing baseball with my friends, running through the quiet streets and exploring every corner. Life was simple and full of small adventures. It was during one of these games that the baseball incident happened. We were playing near the edge of the forest when, with a throw too strong, the ball disappeared among the trees. That forest, especially during autumn, always seemed a bit darker and more intimidating. Our parents strictly forbade us from going near the forest, whether by day or especially at night. The forest was seen as a dangerous place full of secrets. That afternoon, I ran home and asked my parents for permission to retrieve the ball. They forbade me with visible apprehension, making it clear it was not safe. The Raccoon Man was a constant figure in the residents' conversations. The stories about him were many and varied, but all shared a common element: fear. Some said he was an old man who had lost his sanity after living alone in the mountains for many years. Others believed he was a vengeful spirit, returning every autumn to haunt the town. Residents' accounts painted a terrifying picture. He was seen wandering the deserted streets at night, with his dirty and ragged clothes, and a terrible smell that preceded him. His face was a mask of dirt and despair, with eyes that seemed to pierce the soul of those who encountered him. Most people avoided talking about him, but there was always someone willing to tell a story, usually around a campfire or during a porch conversation. The sense of collective fear increased with the arrival of autumn. Children were kept indoors at dusk, and the elders exchanged worried glances. There was a palpable tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen. Some families even placed amulets on their doors and windows, hoping to ward off the Raccoon Man. The fear wasn't just of the stories or his appearance. It was something deeper, a sense that he brought with him a darkness that could swallow anyone. Each autumn, the Raccoon Man became a little more real, his stories more vivid, and the terror he inspired more intense. Rumors were countless. Some said he kidnapped children who ventured into the forest. Others, that he had a hideout where he performed macabre rituals. The truth was that no one knew for sure, but everyone preferred not to find out. Gradually, the town seemed to close in on itself, each house a fortress against the invisible threat. Now, let's return to that afternoon when I was with my friends and lost the ball in the forest. Despite my parents' prohibition, I decided to disobey them, wanting to impress my friends, and decided to retrieve the baseball. My heart was pounding as I disobeyed my parents and approached the forest, feeling the fear grow with each step. The forest was dark and intimidating, with deep shadows and an oppressive silence. The temperature dropped, and I felt a chill down my spine. As I walked, I noticed strange movements among the trees. They seemed like shadows moving, whispers carried by the wind. My fear increased, and my heart seemed to want to jump out of my chest. I looked back and saw my friends, standing, with expressions of concern and fear. They didn't want to follow me. Suddenly, a quick, dry sound came from the darkness. That was enough to make me run back to my friends, panic taking over me. I felt the terror coursing through my veins as I left the forest behind. When I got home, I didn't tell my parents anything. I feared being punished for disobeying them, so I kept the fear and unease to myself. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't shake the thoughts about the forest and the strange movements I had seen. The room was dark, and the only light came from the moon, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I was about to fall asleep when I heard a soft sound at the window. My eyes snapped open, and with a racing heart, I turned my head to look. There, at my bedroom window, was the raccoon man. He had the same dirty and ragged appearance, the tattered clothes, and a horrible smell that seemed to invade the entire room. In his hand, he held my baseball. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. He slowly opened the window, never taking his eyes off me, and raised the ball, as if offering it to me. The terror mixed with curiosity held me in place. Could it be the same man I'd seen in the forest? The coincidence was too frightening to ignore. He made a slow gesture for me to come closer. The fear gripped me, but there was something hypnotic about his presence that kept me from screaming or running. The putrid smell became stronger as he leaned into the room, the distorted smile never leaving his face. Finally, the adrenaline overcame the paralyzing fear. I took a step back, tripping over my own feet, and fell to the floor. Without thinking, I got up and, in an impulse that mixed courage and desperation, opened the window. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling and almost inaudible. The raccoon man leaned in a little more, maintaining that disturbing smile. "I am the guardian of the forest," he replied, his voice raspy and hissing. "And this ball, I found it. It belongs to you, doesn't it?" The raccoon man held the baseball in his dirty hand. When he extended it to me, I could see it was torn, needing repair. My heart was still pounding, but the curiosity and promise of getting my ball back kept me there, standing. "I can fix the ball for you," he said, with a smile that seemed forced and strange. "At my house, I have everything we need to make it like new." I hesitated, the fear still present, but his words were captivating. He continued, trying to convince me. "Besides, at my house, you'll find many other fun things. I have cool friends who would love to play with you. We can play all kinds of games, have amazing adventures." His voice was seductive, full of promises of fun and companionship. The idea of playing with new friends and getting my ball back was tempting. I looked at the torn ball in his hand, and for a moment, imagined what it would be like to fix it and continue playing with my friends. My mind was divided between the fear of the unknown and the attraction of the raccoon man's promises. "Come with me, it will only take a little while," he insisted. "You'll have a lot of fun, I promise." My heart told me to run, but the promise of new adventures and the sight of the torn ball made my feet move towards him. I took a few hesitant steps towards the open window, the cold night breeze making my hands tremble. Finally, with the torn ball as a symbol of his promises, I decided to follow the raccoon man. He opened the window wider and gestured for me to follow. The horrible smell emanating from him almost made me retreat, but the curiosity and promise of fun pulled me forward. I climbed out the window and followed the raccoon man, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. He led me through the darkness, each step echoing in the night silence. The forest trees seemed to close in on us as we walked, their shadows creating frightening shapes in the moonlight. He guided me through the forest, his steps silent on the leaf-covered ground. The darkness around us seemed almost tangible, and every sound was amplified, increasing my nervousness. Finally, we reached an old abandoned house, half hidden by dense vegetation. The house seemed forgotten by time, with its walls covered in moss and broken windows. The place exuded a sense of desolation and fear, as if it harbored dark secrets long buried. Shadows danced on the walls as the wind blew, creating frightening shapes that made my heart beat faster. Upon entering, the putrid smell intensified, blending with the scent of mold and rotten wood. The interior of the house was filled with old, dusty furniture, with cobwebs hanging from the corners. Everything was shrouded in a sinister gloom, only partially illuminated by the moonlight coming through the broken windows. He gestured for me to follow him to a door at the end of the hallway. With each step I took, the sense of dread grew. He slowly opened the door, revealing a staircase leading down to a dark basement. The faint light barely illuminated the steps, and I felt a chill down my spine, thinking about what might be waiting down there. We descended the steps, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The dirt floor of the basement made my steps echo eerily. At the bottom of the stairs, he lit an old lamp hanging from the ceiling, revealing a nightmarish scene. The basement walls were covered with strange and disturbing symbols, painted in a dark red that looked like blood. On precariously placed shelves along the walls were decapitated heads, their eyes glazed and mouths open in expressions of eternal horror. The air was thick with the smell of decomposition that made my stomach turn. In the center of the basement was a macabre altar, covered with melted candles and more bloody symbols. On the altar, ritualistic objects and human remains formed a grotesque and terrifying image. The terror paralyzed me, and I could barely breathe. My mind raced in all directions, trying to process the horrific scene before me. He approached the altar and placed the torn baseball next to one of the candles. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he were performing a ritual. Then he turned to me, that distorted smile still on his face. "Now you are part of this," he said, his hissing voice echoing in the basement. "Here, you will find much more than you imagined." The combination of the nauseating smell and the sight of the decapitated heads was too much for me. Feeling a wave of panic, I began to back away slowly, desperately trying to find an exit. The man watched my every move, his eyes gleaming in the gloom. Finally, adrenaline took over. I turned and ran back to the stairs, climbing the steps as fast as my trembling legs would allow. The sound of my steps echoed through the basement, and I could feel his presence following me. I reached the top of the stairs and ran through the abandoned house, my heart pounding in my chest. I burst through the front door, the dark forest enveloping me once again. I didn't look back, running as fast as I could, trying to leave that horrifying vision behind. I ran through the forest like never before. Every shadow seemed like a monster, and every sound a sign that he was following me. The uneven ground made my steps difficult, and I stumbled over roots and rocks, almost falling several times. Fear was like fuel, pushing me forward, but also making my movements desperate and clumsy. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I could barely see the path ahead. The branches of the trees scratched my face and arms, but I didn't care about the pain. All that mattered was getting as far away as possible from that house and that horrible man. Each breath was a struggle, my lungs burning with the effort. I heard the sounds of the forest, each one amplified by the silence of the night. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of branches, everything made me believe he was right behind me. My heart beat uncontrollably, and sweat poured down my face, mixing with tears of pure terror. After what felt like an eternity, I found a small hiding place under a fallen tree. The tree had created a sort of natural shelter, with its roots forming a small cave. Without thinking twice, I threw myself inside, trying to hide as best as I could. My heavy breathing was almost inaudible as I struggled to make no sound. The fear of being found was paralyzing. I knew I couldn't go home until dawn, so I curled up there, hugging my knees and trying to control my sobs. The hours passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. The cold of the night began to seep into my bones, but I barely noticed, as the terror was much more intense. A child's mind is a fragile place, and every noise in the forest seemed like a sign he was getting closer. The wind whispered through the leaves, creating eerie whispers that made my heart jump. I imagined the raccoon man approaching, his distorted smile and eyes shining in the darkness. I fought against sleep, fearing that if I closed my eyes, he would find me. Every time my head dropped from exhaustion, I forced myself to stay alert, my eyes wide open in the dark. The forest was a place of mysteries and dangers, and that night, it felt like a labyrinth with no way out, where every shadow hid a new terror. Finally, the first rays of light began to appear on the horizon, painting the sky a pale blue. The safety of daylight gave me the courage to leave my hiding place. My muscles were stiff and sore, but I knew I needed to get back home. I carefully stood up, making sure he wasn't around. I walked slowly through the forest, my steps now more cautious. Every shadow still made me shiver, but the daylight brought a sense of relief. When I finally saw the houses of my town in the distance, a wave of emotion washed over me. I was safe, at least for now. The first rays of sunlight brought some relief, but the terror of the previous night still haunted me. I arrived home exhausted, and my parents greeted me with worry and relief. It didn't take long for me to tell them what had happened. Their expressions of shock and horror only increased my fear. Knowing the seriousness of the situation, they immediately called the authorities. The local police arrived quickly, their faces serious and attentive, as I recounted the encounter with the sinister man and the horrifying vision in the basement. The authorities headed to the forest, accompanied by my parents and some curious neighbors. The tension was in the air, everyone apprehensive about what they might find in the abandoned house. When they arrived at the house, the police were alarmed by the state of the place. The decaying entrance and the nauseating smell emanating from the interior confirmed my reports. Armed with flashlights and weapons, they descended into the basement. The flickering lights revealed the walls covered with strange and disturbing symbols, and as they illuminated the shelves, the police were horrified to see the decapitated heads. The news of the discovery spread quickly through the small mountain town, and the community was in a state of shock. The raccoon man, who many thought was just a legend or a disturbed figure, turned out to be a serial killer. The authorities' investigations confirmed that he was responsible for the disappearance of several children over the years. The true nature of the raccoon man as a serial killer deeply shook the community. People who once whispered about him now spoke openly, sharing stories and memories they had kept secret. Fear and distrust permeated every conversation, and the sense of safety that once existed was replaced by constant vigilance. The authorities launched an operation to capture the killer, scouring the forest and the area around the abandoned house. The fear that he was still at large made everyone keep their doors and windows locked. The town, which had once been peaceful and welcoming, now seemed like a place where evil could lurk around every corner. The collective reaction was one of horror and sadness. Families mourned their lost loved ones, and there was a sense of collective grief. Children were kept under strict supervision, and a curfew was imposed to ensure everyone's safety. The trust in the town's peace was irreparably shattered, and the myth of the raccoon man became a terrifying reality that no one would ever forget. The authorities eventually found clues leading to the man's identity. His capture brought temporary relief, but the scars he left on the community would remain forever. The abandoned house was demolished, but the memory of the horrors that took place there would continue to haunt the residents for generations. The horror of that night and the subsequent discoveries left an indelible mark on me. The hatred I feel for the raccoon man is deep, a monster who hid among us, using fear and mystery as his weapons. He wasn't just a legend or a disturbing figure, he was a cruel killer, and the terror he spread will never be forgotten. I want to warn everyone about the danger figures like him represent. Evil can hide in the most unexpected places, behind the most innocent masks. Never underestimate the signs, never ignore the stories. The raccoon man may be a symbol, but his presence is a grim reminder that we must always be vigilant. Children are especially vulnerable, their curiosity and innocence making them easy targets for the unknown. It is our responsibility to protect them, to ensure they are safe. The horrors I experienced should serve as a warning. Protect your children, listen to their fears, and always be aware of what might be lurking in the shadows.